My name is Peter Brewer. I'm the chairman of the Gomery Data Committee. I would like to introduce the panelists very briefly. They'll each give a short talk. We've only got half an hour, so it'll be maybe 8 minutes each. Then we'll have a break, and then it'll be an open discussion, which I will moderate on where we're going with modern data sets. So the panelists, Brooks Hansen, the Director of Publications for AGU, my colleague. Rob Gropp from AIBS. The AIBS team do a wonderful job of supporting our Gomery Research Board. Lisa DiPinto for NERDA. I'd like to congratulate Lisa on bringing to a successful conclusion just now the assessment phase for NERDA. Almost. And Don Lindberg, the Director Emeritus of the National Library of Medicine, who was a real pioneer in bringing data systems and data knowledge into the field of medicine. So each of you has about 8 minutes, and then we'll have a break. So Brooks, if you would like to lead off. Thank you.
So I'll primarily amplify and extend a little bit some of the very important comments and thoughts that Marcia had. Within the Earth and Space Science journals, we've been working together across publishers for the last several years, recognizing many of the challenges that Marcia suggested, and actually that came out through many of the comments, that it's that open data, particularly in as you all are setting the example for in oceanography and the Earth and Space Sciences, are critically important. AGU's actually had a data position statement since the late 90s. I think 1997 was one of the first societies to come up with a data position statement, emphasizing the importance of data in the Earth and Space Sciences, because many of our observations are over time, as Marcia mentioned, and longitudinal data are critically important for many of our key observations and conclusions. So recognizing that, a large number of the publishers got together, worked with both funding agencies and repositories, and came up with a common commitment to open data. Now, this now includes almost all of the major publishers in the Earth and Space Sciences, major data repositories as well, supported by funders worldwide. So we recognize in doing this commitment, and we formed a coalition called the Coalition on Publishing Data in Earth and Space Sciences, and a set of commitments around open data, but recognizing this, that we had to not only set standards within the publishing community, and we're working on that, but also work to help authors and researchers meet those commitments to open data. Part of this is also recognizing that publication is one of, and research papers are our key venue for advancing our science, and having the data connected with those publications is important for the integrity of science. So I guess that would be partly my response to the epidemiologists is publications are more than just getting credit. They're really, they're a major way that our science gets shared to the public, which is using this, and has in turn that the public has confidence, and the scientific community has confidence in the integrity of those data, is the ability to investigate, probe, and reuse, and use further the data that is part of a publication. In many ways, the most important output that's mentioned or that's featured in the publication is the data that are part of them. That's how we build, in many ways, those longitudinal studies that are really critical for our conclusions. So a key part of this also is recognizing that we need to help the research community meet the responsibilities of open data from the inception, on collection of data through the best practices in citing that data. And one aspect that these publishers agreed on is on what's now the commitment on, best practices in data citation principles, which, as Marcia mentioned, include data being cited in the references, not in the acknowledgments, or if they're also in the acknowledgments or in the text as a personal communication, things like that, that our standard is emerging to pull these into the references, and that's something that most of the publishers will be following soon. We're also working essentially throughout the publishing community to change kind of the way manuscripts are handled and data are linked to papers from submission, actually even before submission, by working with the repositories. One of our commitments is recognizing that the best places for these data are not as supplements to the paper. There's very little metadata there. They're hard to find. But in those domain repositories that have expertise around that particular type of data, there's curators there that can help researchers put the data in their best possible format, include the best metadata, and set the standards for what data the community expects to be in those repositories or as part of a publication. That's one of the big challenges we face, is the extent of data and the amount of data that we're collecting. It's actually impossible to save all of it, and what's most useful is often a derived product or some derived set of data. And the community standards, and we will be looking to those communities, are very important in helping set that norm. So I think I'll stop there, and we can get some more in question and answers. But as a final comment, I think this is really a community effort. The whole community needs to be involved, from societies in recognizing as part of their award and fellowship structure the importance of data curation and including that in their awards, all the way down to the research community, as I mentioned.
Well, thank you, Brooks. I must say that I'm in the business right now of trying to get some data from colleagues who publish in AGU journals, and the problems you describe are all there. Rob?
Excuse me. So I'm with the American Institute of Biological Sciences, and we have both individual and organizational members. And the organizational members, about 150 professional societies, research centers, natural history museums. So it's really the spectrum of institutions and organizations conducting or supporting research in all fields of biology. And what we've been doing over the last, we've probably had 3 meetings in the last 13 months dealing with different aspects of data transparency, publishing, research, and education and workforce issues, all because what we are encountering is, as a community, the biological sciences, as you might expect, are an incredibly diverse array, right? And so we have very big science. We also have individual practitioners, in a lab or in a field, but also, out as part of large research teams. And so as a result of that, there's a lot of different cultural practices, and there's a lot of different norms and expectations in different parts of different aspects of the community. And so what we have found is that not all the journals are in the same place or are ready for open data kinds of initiatives. And so they're struggling right now to come to terms with how do they do that, how do they manage it. Others are very eager to pursue it and have been leaders in that area. So what we've been trying to convene some of the leadership and some of the publishers of these organizations to do is start talking about some shared or common community standards, so that across the biological sciences, people can better increase access to data and become more comfortable with it. And what we've seen is there is a growing, we're not seeing the same. 10 years ago, the idea of sharing data was incredibly controversial, and I think that's becoming less so, which is a positive statement. But we're also seeing that there's still a lot of confusion about how to make it available, what the responsibilities and commitments are, what the expectations are, and a lot of the points that Marcia raised in terms of how do you interact with somebody, how do you access their data, how do you collaborate and work with that are really still things that need to be addressed. The other thing that's really exciting, I think, within the biological sciences right now is that, and it's also a huge challenge in a number of ways, is that biology is really increasingly becoming big science in ways that it hasn't historically been. And so that's exciting and also challenging and comes with a lot of growth pains and things like that. But we're seeing, if you look at natural history collections, for example, with new technology and new tools, the ability to digitize and make available not only images of specimens, but all the field notes and the ancillary environmental data that go with them. It's really providing an exciting opportunity to do new kinds of research. And it's also leading then to the challenge of how do we get and allow that data, so sort of the question of how do we bring together different domains to answer some of our more pressing questions. So if it's how does climate change impact public health or endangered species or all these sorts of things, it really does require bringing together very different data. And so what we found is even within the biological sciences, a lot of those questions require bringing communities together that haven't historically collaborated, and they've developed their own systems and they've developed their own metadata or not. And there's a big need for brokering and for sort of the community coming together to share information and learn how to access that information. So what we've been trying to do is really convene the biological sciences community to start working collaboratively to promote the incentives and the education and training of current practitioners as well as the next generation, to identify what the standards are, what the responsibilities are, to be a member of the community and to be good stewards of data. And I think I'll probably leave it on my last comment, building on, I think, Marcia, your slide around, who's going to manage some of this. And what we're seeing is in a lot of areas within the biological sciences, there's going to be new career paths that have not been envisioned yet. And collectively, we all need to figure out how to support those, how funders can support them, what the institutional responsibilities are, and how we as either professional communities or universities or whatever your place is, can recognize and incentivize those, because it's incredibly important that we have people who know how to curate, manage, take care of the data, all of that spectrum kinds of things. And I routinely, probably once a week, I hear frustrations from, again, going back to natural history museums, where you have collection managers who are suddenly data managers, and that's not what they were trained for, and so they're feeling incredibly stressed and getting pulled between things. And I think you can find that same example in any other community where you have that. So it's a real challenge that I think collectively we all need to start thinking through and talking about and talking to the funding agencies about. And so I think this is an exciting forum because we have such a rich crosscut of the scientific community here, from deep sea ocean to geneticists. So it's a really nice opportunity for us all to try to address some of these issues. So.
Well, thank you, Rob. I think Marcia touched on data professionals, professionalizing the career, and you mentioned it. I would just say that we established the rule here in Gomery that for the major consortia, each group had to have a professional data manager who worked with the team to ensure things were done. In fact, as soon as this meeting is over, we go to a Gomery Data Committee meeting where all those people are there. They're great to work with. It's been enormously successful, and so these are career paths which are going to be increasingly important. Thank you. Lisa?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Lisa DePinto, and I work for NOAA, and for the past 5.5-ish years, I've been the chief scientist for NOAA on the Deepwater Horizon Natural Resource Damage Assessment. So we've had to deal with data management and the grappling with the issue of data openness on our litigation, and made a decision very early on that we wanted to be open with our data on this case. And so from the earliest days of the case, we made a commitment to making the data publicly available, open source, in a format that was going to be user-friendly and easy for people besides just our team preparing the natural resource damage assessments would be able to use. Although, obviously, damage assessment of this scope, the nature of the ecosystem level effects, the duration, the types of information that we needed to collect, we needed a system that we could pull all that data together for our own use and understanding and interpretation and findings. But we also recognized the importance of the massive amounts of data that we were collecting synoptically in the Gulf of Mexico to the outside community. And, frankly, to make that data available to BP, who we were sitting on the other side of the table from, for them to use the data to come up with their own findings as well. So we took this issue on head on, and a lot of the points you made resonated very, very highly with me in terms of it's not easy to do. It's expensive to do, and frankly, we got some resistance from some of our researchers about posting data on a public website where someone else can scoop the data, write the papers, misuse it, an adverse party might use it against us, et cetera. So everything you said, probably and more, I could probably add to that list, definitely was an issue for us. But we took on that challenge in our litigious environment to make the data available. And in order to do that, at the same time we were faced with the challenge of collecting all the data and bringing all that data in, we staffed up with a really amazing team of data managers and data specialists to develop a system, a data warehouse, if you will, called NOAA Diver, Data Integration Visualization Exploration and Reporting Tool. Sorry about that. So it's NOAA Diver. See, I've got your attention now, and you can then go to the NOAA Diver website. It's an open source, queryable data and metadata site where you can use one of our prefab queries to look at data and download data and print out maps. You can design your own queries and do whatever you want to do with the data. The metadata is there, so you can look at the work plans that were developed to create and collect the data so that you have an understanding of what was done and how it was done, and it also links to some of the reports that the data then produced. So we had also, ahead of that, developed an environmental response management tool that was used for the response that posted data in real time kind of on a daily basis. But this data diver tool was something that we wanted to implement and make sure that the research results that we collected as part of this assessment were made publicly available. Right now, our diver system has some 13 million data records on it, publicly available. We've got results from some 20,000 trips out into the field, so it was no small task pulling that together, but that's what we've done for the case. And it's also in compliance with the Office of Science and Technology Policy's paper that as requiring federal agencies to make their federally funded research results more publicly accessible. And that OSTP memo refers to not only digital data, but peer-reviewed publications. So at a small level, our work for the DWH Natural Resource Damage Assessment is in compliance with the OSTP requirements, but at a larger level, NOAA also has developed a public access to research results plan that makes NOAA's data publicly available in our data archive centers, and also peer-reviewed publications publicly available through both a NOAA implemented system and then a system called Chorus that we partner with outside groups with, so that the data will be publicly available and archived for long term. So I think between what we've done for Deepwater Horizon is consistent with the White House, the Office of Science and Technology policy memo, and I think we're really working to make a consistent program of data availability for the public, part of what we do in our everyday business. The peer-reviewed publications that have come out of the Deepwater Horizon work are available on our website. So we're working on that both for the case and as a NOAA program. And moving forward, I know that our federally funded research grantees are going to be required or are required to develop data management plans and develop as part of their proposals to us plans for how they're going to get the data to NOAA for us to archive in our data centers, our information repositories, and what their plans are to make their publications available to us so that we can make them available to the public too. So data transparency, I mean, if you're looking for a panelist to support this concept of data transparency, you found one with me, which is shocking considering that I'm coming from sort of a litigation world, but early on in the case, we felt like let the data stand or fall as the data should stand or fall, and I feel like that's a good policy to have as a science agency, and we've really advanced ourselves in making that a reality.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Could I just say the business of pulling into yourself the data which is deposited is awfully good. You've populated your database. We had a Gourmet research board meeting yesterday, and one of the things we talked about was the fact that until now in the program, people have been putting data into the database. We've had too few people taking it out, and so we want to stimulate that discussion. We will be proactive about this in stimulating new uses for the data and encouraging people to draw down other people's data and use it. It's easy to talk the talk. You've got to walk the walk. So full disclosure, I have just submitted a paper to the journal of which I am editor-in-chief, where I used somebody else's data published 4 years ago, and I didn't include them as a co-author. I wouldn't have done that 5 years ago. I'm happy to do it now. So it's a sea change. Thank you. And Don, we've saved the best for the last.
All right, that's good. Thank you very much. Well, I'm pleased to be here, and I definitely want to enroll myself as a true believer in these efforts that you're undertaking. They're very important. They're also very difficult, but I salute you. The GOMRI is a great undertaking. So I have to give you a little bit of advice after all. Why not, if not a Dutch uncle or Swedish uncle? So my advice is definitely to concentrate on building the social group sense that demands sharing of the data. In other words, the people is the difficult part of the problem. There's lots of technical solutions. Don't get stuck in that quagmire. Then again, I guess I'm the only NIHer around here, so I ought to say something. Yes? That's good. I'm a former NIHer anyway, as of May. But from an NIH point of view, the requirement of data sharing of research data, really truly started with Jim Watson heading the Human Genome Project. And Watson insisted that the data be shared, that they be shared promptly, like within 48 hours. And there was a little bit of a, my way or the highway to it, but in the end, the Human Genome Project did work, and it was 100% due to Watson's personal intellectual force. So now when we start a new project of any sort at NIH, someone will surely say, well, but you're going to share data, aren't you? Oh, yeah, of course. So it really started with Jim. But of course, the data from the Human Genome Project came to NLM with our responsibility to do the database work. So I thought I'd say two little things about that work that you might not know of. I mean, firstly, the idea that all this is just automation, the data cream out from one computer to another, that's not the way it was at all. I mean, much of the sequence data was hand annotated. And even though there was some sent by internet, of course, the NLM people would make 20, 30 telephone calls per day to discuss with the contributors, the data transmission. So unauditable transactions, that is to say, things that didn't seem to work, were as often caused by oversubscription as by being stingy. So the Americans were particularly keen on this. So you'd get a transmission with a header that said, well, here's 1,000 nucleotides, and then there'd be 1,200. So that would be, then a phone call would say, well, geez, we had extra stuff, we thought we'd just give it to you. So learning how to do that took a long while, and you're right, there's a lot of talent expended in making these data problems work. But also, when things went wrong, which they did, I would get phone calls in 3 different languages, at least English, German, and French, daily about the problems. These are the unauditable things and whatnot. And so I thought I would mention one of the solutions. There are 2 really parts to that. One is better communication between persons, but the second thing was use of standards. And we ended up using something called ASN.1 and Abstract Syntax Notation .1. It had a lot of advantages. I can go in on them if anyone is seriously interested. But from my point of view, those irate phone calls stopped in 2 months. I mean, we finally somebody knew what they were supposed to send and somebody knew what they were supposed to receive, and it was all spelled out ahead of time in ASN.1. And it also wasn't American, it was international. And no one knew what the hell it meant anyway. That was another advantage. You actually had to read the instruction book. So that was a great relief to me, and I definitely commend the business of standards. I know that you're talking about standards, but you got to actually use them. NLM had a second brush with, I'll call it the mysteries of data sharing rather than how to do things, but clinicaltrials.gov was created by, again, order of the Congress, but done by NLM, and it is a big success. I mean, there's a huge amount of description of all clinical trials done, not only in our country, but 100 others. And the results are coming up, but not quite at 100%. So what's the issue? Why do I mention this? Well, the rationale for getting that project going was two simple things. What the world was after was no secret trials and no secret data. And there was plenty of both. So that gave us a sort of a underpinning of public irritation, anger, I would say, about particularly focused on drug trials that were improperly reported. So there's essentially a public demand. There was congressional legislation, jointly resolved the House and the Senate, signed by the President. There was NIH rulemaking, which took longer than the Congress, but anyway. So there's a threat of loss of funding if you don't report these trial results. Substantial fines, like $250,000 a day, that's peanuts to the drug companies, but it's embarrassing to have to report them to the board. There was support of professional organizations in medicine and biology, and still, to this very day, half of the results never see print. Now, if you ask me why, I mean, that's a whole long conversation, but basically I don't know. I can't explain it. I mean, it was a big surprise to everybody, but half do not ever see print. So the only results are in clinicaltrials.gov. Okay, so speaking of print reminds me that all of the Gulf Coast research results that go in a publication in scientific journals really should be indexed by a terminology that includes the important concepts in these research studies. And in some agencies, all of the government-funded stuff goes to NLM, and other agencies not, particularly NSF. I don't know the reason for that. But if we at NLM are going to do anything about your data, we want to have a serious instruction from you about the key research concepts so that they're built into the terminology. These things change all the time. I guess this whole meeting is about the times they are changing, but they really are. And so the mesh terminology is, it's altered 150 times a year as new concepts enter it. So hooray for GOMRI. But there's a last difficulty ahead of you, and that is that the baseline environmental data are often absent or inadequate. Rita and I have talked about that, are wholly in agreement. So I was interested to hear that you're just entering the second phase where people ask, they're going to ask you some difficult things. They're going to ask you things like, well, how about lead levels, or pick any other kind of compound? Do they go up or down in children, following the episode? So good luck trying to answer that if somebody hasn't studied it ahead of time. I mean, you can't just dream this stuff up. It's talking science. So I thought just in the category of war stories, I would mention two questions that I was asked that stayed with me vividly for the rest of my life. So around 1965, we at University of Missouri had won an HEW. It was HEW, not HES then, competition, and we created the National Center for Healthcare Research. Pompous title, but that's what they used it. So on day one, I picked up the phone, and somebody asked me the following things. What are the normal dimensions of the human shoulder joint? Not a clue, not a clue. In fact, it was like 25 years later at NLM that we did the Visible Human project and began to have those kind of numbers. So a perfectly reasonable question. They'll ask you reasonable questions to which you won't have answers. A second memorable question came shortly thereafter, back in those old days, namely, what is the normal incidence of Guillain-Barré syndrome, this neurological problem that was popping up in people who got our latest, greatest flu vaccine? again, that's not so far in the past, these same problems arise. Those data didn't exist. I mean, it wasn't a question of messing around with files. They did not exist. And even today, we'd do a little bit better, but they're still damn hard to come by. And if someone hasn't studied it ahead of time, you're not going to have an answer. So and I'm just suggesting that as they start asking you questions, some will be easier, like economic data. Businesses are often quite good about that. But the health, the veterinary, the medical questions are going to come your way, and some of them are going to be tough. Just one last point in the category of the times they are changing. So the two examples I gave you were the data were hard to come by or sparse. And in an environmental sense, you'll find that the case. But there is also the case now, particularly in genetics, where the data are so voluminous that if they're handled in an awkward way by amateurs, they kill the networks. I mean, the data they're really a powerful weapon. So if you start sloshing around like this weather data for 45 years, I mean, man, that's a sludge that will drive the network to its knees. So the network people guard against that, and then there's the security people, which we all know about. And the final result is that the behavior of the networks is itself now the subject of studies. And so there's an NLM paper with Clemson University, just published recently, that deals with that. And one thing I learned from that paper is that out in university land, I mean, the networks are failing and awkward and slow and so forth. And so a scheme has arisen, which is called, amazingly, the scientific DMZ, the demilitarized zone. So this is a clubby kind of a thing where, like, I'm entering this thing, I have my bona fides, and I have my colleagues, and they know me, and I know, we're all in the hot tub together, more or less. And so the convention is, so let's just compute as opposed to fighting the security people. Isn't that interesting? So we've sort of come through this rabbit hole into the other side where, yeah, you can get a lot done, but you better make your arrangements because you can get clobbered. I mean, some huge data burst can kill you and your data and the system. All kind of fun, but anyway, again, I take my hat off to Gomery and all the things you're trying to accomplish. Good luck.
Well, thank you, Don.